So without further ado, I welcome the first speaker,
We think in fields where the decision and the choices and the cost on the line is life and death, is the well-being of people's entire lives. We believe in this world it is absolutely vital that we mean that the most people could possibly get into these jobs to help the most people and deliver the best quality that we can. 3 things to do for you in my speech today. 1, setup, then my 2 substantive points. 1, how we develop and we uplift the quality and quantity of service we provide in these fields. And then secondly, on how we improve gender equality for women as well in these fields as well. So onto the point about setup. What is our model for this debate? What do we see that what do we see that these things look like? What do we see like these incentive and affirmative action schemes look like? They look like quotas, they look like schemes and initiatives. They look, for example, like similar things that we see in like women for STEM initiatives that we see at schools, for example. We see similar things happening with men in education, men being in nursing as well. It also looks like scholarships being given for like better education in these areas as well. And we believe that these are just for the majority, like they're there for men to get into these jobs. What do we believe that currently a lot of these professions look like? These professions like teaching, these professions like counseling, these professors like nursing and social work, what do they look like? We believe firstly they're criminally understaffed. Why is this? Because they're often very hard jobs, they're often not very glamorous jobs. These jobs often deal with things like very difficult mental health, they often deal with like death or dying, or also like they can be very difficult, and particularly in education as well. We believe that often we see that altruistic people end up doing these jobs. Secondly, we also see that these jobs are particularly in female-dominated fields at the moment, and therefore they are also very much underpaid comparable to other male fields. Why is this? We believe like the patriarchy spreads the false narrative that women are uniquely suited to do these jobs and also do not pay them as well. Note, we do not believe this is true. We believe men are equally as capable of doing these jobs as women as well. So onto my first substantive point about how we develop and we uplift equality in these fields. And this argument, I'll prove to you that through encouraging far more men to get into these essential fields, we improve the quality and the quantity that we deliver to society and those who need it the most. Why is this important? Because we believe failure in these fields to deliver quality is immense. We'll tell you, and I'll unpack that a bit more later as well. So why do we believe men cannot currently access these fields? We believe firstly the norm obstructs these norms, and the narrative that we get that women are far more altruistic or more suited to these are obstructed. We are told that to get into this field you need to be caring, you need to be altruistic. And then secondly, we are told, often in our society, that men are far less caring, or that women are inherently far more suited to these roles and to be caring. Why is this? Firstly, we believe that the patriarchy has this incentive to perpetuate these things I told you as how they do this and how they don't want to pay women as much. Secondly, we believe it's a holdover from these ancient old traditions that we see from the 50s, in which women would stay at home, they would care for the children, they'd do all these other chores around the home, it would have typically be seen to be far more caring or used to these roles. And then thirdly, we also believe that women currently in these fields perpetuate these norms and more. When you see a lot more women in these fields, you're far more likely to just inherently believe that women must therefore be more suited to these roles. We don't believe that's true. We believe that's a norm that we reject. Secondly, we believe men don't get into these fields because there are very limited role models for young men who want to get into these fields to access these. You don't go into a field which you don't see without other men or other men that you would share or be with these people. Why is this? A, we believe there's a sense of companionship that you get when you go into these fields with people of your same gender, when you have people that are similar to you. B, we believe that often for your schooling experiences, you often form when you're in high school, you go into cliques of people in your own of your own gender, or you just go to for example an all boys school. Therefore you believe in your back of your mind you're far more suited, you're far more able to talk and be sociable with people that are the same gender as you. One of the implications therefore of this, when you you're far less likely to go to a field which doesn't have people of the same gender as you, because you feel you're far less likely to interact or be as well off with this. It would be this perpetuates still through uni life life as well. These same things go through high school, they go into university, they go into your jobs as well. So how do we get far more men into these fields? Firstly, we just simply believe it is far easier to get into these fields if you're a man that is thinking about going into these fields. It's just easier to do. You have assistants, so these quotas there, which means you're far more likely to get hired, you get far more likely to get better educated, to be a higher quality person, an applicant when you get into these jobs, you're far more likely to get hired. Secondly, we believe we combat these norms, particularly at a younger age, to get far more men to be like young boys to want to be getting into these fields. We believe this looks like educating young boys at a very early age, going into the school, holding up a role model, getting male nurses, for example, to come to the school and say, this is the value of this is how you can do these things, this is why, this is how you can be caring. We believe you are caring individuals. We promote these things in young boys. We believe this is very particularly impactful when they're far more open-minded. Therefore, we see this goes into more generally when they have a belief in their job, they're far more valuable when they're learning these things. They believe they can do these things. They have faith they can do that. Thirdly, we just believe there are role models here now. You hold up these examples, as I told you, incentivizing these other young people to join, and other men will also come over time. We also believe this compounds over time as well. A few men get into these fields, are far more likely that other men come into these fields. More men equals far more men coming into these fields. We believe this compounds. What are the outcomes of this? We believe firstly, just inherently, we see more people come into these fields. Why is this? We believe in the status quo, it's very limited people that want to go into these very difficult professions, as I told you. And then secondly, we told you need to be altruistic to go into these professions. And we already believe that inherently there are not a lot of people that want to go into these professions for those reasons. And then when we cut off half of these people, men in this instance are half of the population, because we tell you this profession is not for you because you are not inherently caring. What we believe, we say now, when we have this affirmative action, when we have these initiatives, we say that now this other half of the population can go into these fields. You are able, you're incentivized to go into these fields because you are caring, you're more likely, you're more capable. We just believe at the end of the day, you have far more work, because we believe we combat these problems with understaffing in these areas. We believe now you have better class sizes for a teacher. We believe you can take more time with a student. You can be better able to deal with a patient, for example. Secondly, we would just believe the quality is a whole lot better. We believe there are a lot of situations that you have which are gender specific, which you need some of your own gender to be in these areas as well. What does this look like? It looks like, say for example, a lot of health things. It says for example, having a male teacher to deal with, like a young boy going through puberty, for example, a very intimate and personal thing that you need. It also looks like counselling. It looks like a social worker being able to talk down and narrate an often misogynistic older man. It looks like higher quality education in the healthcare. We believe a failure when you are unable to do these things, when a young boy, for example, is unable or unwilling to speak to someone of their mental health issues because they don't believe it is right. We believe that is a harm. We believe this is essential. That is why it's work highly. I'll take that point now.
Can you explain why so many men actually want to be in these jobs? You could also underpaid, unglamorous, but they can easily get into better ones, like the status quo.
Because we believe that, like, the problem that we currently get in a lot of these jobs is that you're told you're inherently not altruistic enough. We believe that we tell people that you can be altruistic. A lot of people go into these jobs because they want to be altruistic. That's why we believe women go into these jobs because they want to make a change. The similar thing happens with men. Very quickly on gender equality. We believe we can limit gender equality that happens a lot for women. Why is this? We believe firstly we can reduce pay equity in these areas as well. We believe you take the gender politics away from a lot of these issues and a lot of these things that happen. We believe that now pay equity of these jobs now is no longer a gender issue. We believe right-wing parties cannot hide behind these things that pay equity or not paying nurses enough is a gender issue in these areas. But we believe people are just more inherently likely to vote to have increased pay in these areas. We believe this looks just having more people in the field, you're more likely to vote for a pay rise for yourself, but also more men who have friends who are in these fields now as well. And then C, it's also challenging the norms. That the idea that men fields or male fields are far more prestigious. We believe that this imparts onto this field now this idea that you deserve far more wealth or you deserve far more pay. We believe that the outcomes of this is in these professions in which the public, which is public and standardized funding, we believe now the justification has previously been used that you pay less, you just pay women-dominated fields inherently less. We believe now it's now politically untenable for you to do so. We believe there's greater independence and agency you get because of this when we pay women more, and now we have these men in these fields. That is why I'm proud to affirm.
When you account for the vulnerability of the groups affected, there are clear, irreversible harms for women here that you have completely ignored on F's side of the house. 3 things in this speech. Firstly, on setup and framing. Secondly, on job displacement. And thirdly, on public reception. Okay, firstly, on setup and framing. 2 things here. Firstly, why aren't men in these roles? And secondly, why is it important that women are in these roles? Why aren't men in these roles? 3 things here. Firstly, they're just generally less desirable for men because they're generally of less pay and things like this. Secondly, there are many other opportunities available for men in the workplace that otherwise wouldn't be there for women. And thirdly, there's a societal stigma that exists around these roles. The fact that they're domestic, the fact that men historically haven't done them, the fact that men have to be the breadwinner and they have to be tough and embody all of this, right? Note that these careers are often done by people who love them, right? So there's another thing here that's like, men aren't systemically barred from these jobs. It's like actually just the fact that not many men want to actually be in these careers because of the stigma, because of the fact that a lot of other higher paying opportunities actually exist for them. So therefore the only group that actually benefits in this debate is this relatively small group of men who really want to do this but can't because they feel societally pressured to not do it, right? So therefore, for affirmative action to be successful, AF must prove that this, their affirmative action, things that they model such as like scholarships and maybe some like education programs are likely to actually break down deeply rooted societal stigmas for these men that are actually barring them from being the job, which we tell you it doesn't, because I think as a man, you're unlikely to see just this one little initiative that a university's doing and then it changes your whole narrative around what society tells you about these jobs, right? And secondly, the cost of doing this and helping this tiny little not massively vulnerable group doesn't have a massive cost, right? Okay, secondly, why is it so important that women are in these roles? Well, we tell you that firstly, women are systemically barred from a lot of other jobs, right? It's harder for them to get educated. It's harder for them to get higher paying jobs. There's generally less jobs in society that are accepting to women because of bias in job interviews and the fact that it's harder to be qualified, right? So without a lot of these women dominated industries such as nursing and teaching, it is so much harder for women comparatively to actually get a job at all, right? And therefore, these jobs are some of the only ones without these kind of barriers, right? And this is so important because women have an equal right to be able to get a stable job and a stable income as men do, right? They have the right to be able to help their families. Note, this is a lot of these jobs are the only way that a lot of these women can get there. So therefore, when they're pushed out of them, a lot of women are made the most vulnerable group here because instead of just being left with a slightly worse job, they're left with either no job at all and no stable income for their family, right? So therefore we tell you that these women matter more because A, they're going to be generally just a larger group than these very specific subset of men who want to do the job but are scared that they're going to get called bad things for doing it. And secondly, they're more vulnerable because if they miss out on the job opportunities, the consequences are so much more disastrous, right? Okay, moving on to my first substantive point about job displacement, right? So we tell you that AF scholarships and schemes are unlikely to actually break down this deeply rooted societal stigma and all the other factors that holds these small group of men back, right? So therefore we tell you that A, not many extra men actually even get into the profession because it's likely not these scholarships are likely not to be a tipping point for the men to actually, go and get into these professions. And secondly, even if a few extra men get into these professions, I'm going to explain to you why this is exceptionally disastrous, right? Okay, why does job displacement occur? 2 reasons. Firstly, there are only so many jobs, right? Because the demand for these professions stays the same. Therefore, intuitively, no matter how effective this scheme is, more men in these roles means less women in these roles, right? Intuitively, one has to replace the other, right? And secondly, logistics. For the government to prove that this is an effective initiative that they might do, they must see a return for their work. This is going to look like things like having a quota and wanting to boot a certain amount of women out of this profession, get a certain amount of men in the profession, which means they're likely to do things like corner cut and unfairly boot women out of these professions to make space for the men, right? Okay, what are the outcomes here? Well, there's less women in these jobs, right? And as per the framing, this is so disastrous dangerous because these women, like a lot of them rely on these kind of jobs to get a stable income, right? A lot of them rely on these jobs very heavily. They're going to have a worse livelihood. They're going to have less opportunity for stability and for them to be able to springboard their career and actually be able to make it further in life, right? And secondly, we tell you that the scale of like the harms against the women that come from all of these like kind of benefits that are very, very much minimal from the ACT team is so much worse, right? It's so exceptionally much worse. So it would just be better off not to do it at all, right? Yes, before I move on, I'll take that
The
point.
jobs referenced in the motion are currently crying out for workers. Why do you think job displacement occurs?
I think that's just blatantly untrue, right? I think things like nursing have a very, very healthy base of like people going into them, and I think we're like starting to see like a rise of people actually going into these industries in the status quo anyway. Okay, secondly, on public perception, two pieces of framing here. Firstly, women desperately and vocally have expressed a desire for help, like from the government via like movements and protests, right? And historically, I think up until this point, men have not really been crying out for like help to get into jobs and stuff, right? So therefore, and like women are already like very, very unhappy that they are already underpaid, right? So like the two reasons here is that like when women's protests are ignored and the government clearly just puts like an incentive towards men who haven't actively actually even been campaigning for it, women are going to get very, very angry, right? Because obviously the government is not listening to any of their demands and instead are bending to the will of a group of people who aren't actually desperately like desiring this change and desperately wanting this, right? And like particularly strong feminists are going to like start protesting a lot more, right? And secondly, when women are globally underpaid, right? So when the money that they need, that the government could be using to like go and like raise the pay in their industry, and they're instead going and using it to subsidize men to come into the industry, this is obviously going to spark outrage for the women, right? No, the stronger the affirmative action that the ACT team proposes, the more, like, the stronger this negative response from the women will be, right? Okay, so what are the outcomes here? Firstly, women are likely to, like, unionize or, like, go on like strikes and things, which is going to generally just decrease the quality of these industries, because when nurses go on strike, obviously they're not going to be very happy, right? Secondly, the stigma is going to become worse because women will now hate the men in these positions like that are replacing them, because the women are like so exceptionally angry that this has actually gone in place. So these men that would be coming to the jobs are going to be further disincentivized to actually go into the job. Thirdly, men are going to feel like more unwelcome, and fourthly, women are going to like generally lose faith in politics because the government isn't doing things that like they actually enjoy, right? So the weighing here, well, these outcomes it's like completely just knife all of the like potential men that could come into the industry for AF. But secondly, women, we tell you, are the most vulnerable group. And when they are harmed here, you should weigh that so much more highly than the harms on the men. So at the end of this speech, even if affirmative action is successful, A, we tell you that not many men actually get in, despite the fact that A, it's not really going to break down the stigma, and B, the societal cost is actually massive, right? And secondly, even if it is really successful, the vulnerable group is harmed so much more than this comparatively less vulnerable group is actually helped at all. Thank you.
The speech and the manifesting statement of the affirmative.
Oh man, they knifed our materials. Someone get a male nurse. Alright, now I've got 3 things to talk to you in my speech today. First of all, on framing and how these professions really look. Second of all, on their main push of displacement. And note that I think this push will also respond to their material about women being angry. And third of all, to remind you of how we improve gender equality and to explain to you how we get more support for diverse and inclusive hiring in general. Okay, first of all, let's start with this idea on framing. They tell you that these jobs have a limited amount of people. This is not true for a variety of reasons. First of all, there is a huge shortage at the moment of workers for these jobs, simply because they are already cutting off half of the population. So it is much, much harder when it is a limited amount of people who want to do these rather difficult jobs to get them into the profession. Also, demand is continually growing for these jobs because the population is aging and the population is growing, which is increasing the social burden on society. Therefore, there will always be an increased demand for these workers. We can never actually fill to capacity, and so women will never be pushed out of the jobs. We're simply filling new spots. I think this was also just implicit and obvious in our initial material when we explained to you how we decrease the shortage by bringing in new workers. We never said anything about getting rid of women, and there's no reason why scholarship programs and saying you have to hire 20 male nurses is ever going to get rid of women. Okay, so that's the first element of framing, and the second element they give you is that women really need these jobs. I think while this is true to some extent, they just ignore everything we heard in the quiz yesterday about how women are doing great in STEM and about how these social norms are generally being broken down and women are coming into male fields. But I think also I'm going to explain to you in my substantive material later on how we continue to break down norms and get women into male fields and vice versa through our material. So I think at the end of that framing, when you look at their point on displacement, which I'm now moving on to, we don't think that there's a limited job market, so we don't think any women will get replaced. I also just think that even if you imagine that a hospital only has a certain amount of people to hire, one, the material we give you about how this will raise the amount of money given to the profession in general will mean that it's easier to hire larger amounts of people, and two, hospitals just probably aren't even reaching this capacity because there is this shortage, because there is this dire situation, and because they continue to grow, demand continues to grow, as we told you. So we just don't think this displacement is happening, and we think even if it happens to a really limited extent, it's just uncharitable of them to tell you that women can only be nurses, social teachers, and doctors. I believe in women. So just to impact that means that the main push of their case, displacement, simply doesn't exist. And I think that really interacts with their women being angry material, because that was actually just an impact of displacement. Like, women would only be angry if they're actually getting pushed out of jobs. So if they're not getting pushed out of jobs, they're not going to be angry. What else did they tell you? That women might be angry because it's wasting money to give scholarships and things. But I think overall you save money and women are happy when they have more people helping them in their profession, when they're no longer overburdened and burnt out, when they feel like something is being done to allow people into the profession, and when they see gender norms, which typically feminists, I'll clue you in, hate, being broken down. I think also just them saying that feminists are going to protest more, I think strong feminists protest as much as they can because there are still huge systemic issues with the patriarchy. I don't think this is going to be a tipping point issue for feminists when there's so many more important issues like the rates of sexual crime against women, which they are more focused on. I just don't think that you can believe that material. So at the end of that, their two main pushes are null and void. So let's examine how we help fix the problems they present to you. We heard at James how we take gender politics out of pay equity so we make it easier for parties to do it, how we increase the amount of voters, i.e. men, who care about this issue and so who are willing to say we should pay these people more, and so we generally just give a much larger political incentive. But what we also do is we give more political capital to other diversity hiring initiatives and other initiatives that are aimed at bringing women into the male-dominated field. Note, this is a problem they characterize to you is a huge issue, women getting into these male-dominated fields. So I think the first thing that happens is they stop feeling like DEI is for other people, right? Male politicians and male voters stop thinking that, oh, that's only something for women. That's something that's geared against me. That's something that's aimed at taking me out of society or blaming me for an issue I don't believe I caused. And they start thinking that's just about getting people into the office. They have friends who benefit from this. Even people in the manosphere are benefiting from this. So they just are generally taking the gender out of the idea of paying these professions more, doing diverse and inclusive hiring and giving political capital to the politicians who want to break down gender norms in general. Before I move on, I'll take your point.
you're a woman who wants to become an astronaut. When you see your government put money and action into making men improve and get into this industry, into this underrepresented field, how do you think you're going to feel about that?
How am I going to feel about the government putting money into getting men into nurses if I want to be an astronaut? I probably don't care because I want to be an astronaut. But even if I wanted to be a nurse, I would just think, awesome, there's more pathways for people to be nurses. There's less of a shortage. I'm going to be less burnt out when I get there, and they're going to pay me more. And actually, I think it's now better because my politicians now care more about DEI. My local male representative now cares more about diversity inclusive hiring. So he's more likely to go to NASA and be like, hire women, or whatever the New Zealand NASA is, NZSDC, I guess, and say, hire more women. So I think at the end of this idea around DEI, men no longer feel like they're outside of the benefit from this, which just gives the government more political capital. It no longer is seen as working just for certain people, but it's seen as helping uplift all communities and break down these gender roles. The outcome of this is huge, and the outcome of the material we gave you earlier about how you increase pay equity and just simply get these professions paid more by giving politicians the political capital and the voter incentive is huge. What do? We break down the gender pay gap because we take these positions which have traditionally only been done by women. Note that governments can't perpetuate the same sort of gender pay gap that private situations can. They do it by simply playing women's professions less on net, because if they paid just men more, it would be extremely obvious because they are an open and democratically accountable system. So we break down this method that government has been using to underpay women, which is really important because when you give women more money, you give them more political capital, you give them more agency, you give them more ability to take a day off work to protest, you give them more ability to make change in society, and so you generally just increase the benefits for women at an insane scale around the world. I think you also just have to believe that because we motivate more voters to support breaking down gender pay gap, because we motivate more voters to support putting people in fields, to support the concept of quotas, and to support general diversity efforts, we motivate them to continue to break down the gender norms. So at the end of this, women are really appreciative because they're going to become an astronaut, they get to become a nurse, and they're no longer overburdened. And of course, more people go into these vital professions, more vulnerable people's lives are saved, and people have someone there who they can trust in a difficult situation. Stand with me.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the second speaker.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. 3 things to do in my speech. Firstly, on how affirmative action looks like and represents itself in society. Secondly, on the outcomes of this affirmative action. And lastly, on women. So firstly, on how affirmative sort of actions look like. And I think before we touch on that, I think we have to look at what these underrepresented jobs look like. I think they do look like it requires a lot of passion, requires a lot of dedication to the job. You can't just say that by increasing the pay or by adding a scholarship into the job, suddenly everyone will want to take on these jobs. I think it does require a lot of hard work. It doesn't just require a little bit of monetary incentive bonus here. But I also think that affirmative action and having role models, the examples that you give us, these schemes, can still be done to engage both male and woman audiences. I don't see why it's necessarily that we have to bring in a male nurse. I think we can bring in both male and female nurses to just try and engage more people, as many many people as we can to be interested in these jobs as in their youth. I think it's more harmful to just bring a male nurse, because now no longer women feel as if, like, women now no longer feel as if this job is somewhere where they can go into. Because I think, like, it's sure we want to engage the job as much as possible. We want to bring in these role models. I think we can do that in a better way if you bring both men and women. Unclear why it should be only men. And I think secondly here on scholarships and the pay incentives for education, men who were already planning to go into this career path occur on both sides of the house. They don't need a bonus incentive. They don't need extra monetary pay, free education. I think it isn't necessarily the tipping point either for men to pursue such careers due to that passion that they have to have incentively, or originally. And I think secondly here, like, you can't just say you can't just say that there is a limited cap, because I think there is a limited cap. I think like hospitals can only have the funds to hire so many people. You can't explain why men are more likely to get hired, but then also say that women don't get kicked out either way. There's a tension here. You can't claim both. Like, it's more like you are more likely to see hospitals trying to work with these schemes, try and fulfill these schemes, and kick women out and hire more men to appease the initiative. I think lastly here, some final piece of analysis. Even if you buy that there might be some men that go into this industry, the investment cost is far more likely to outweigh the potential few candidates that do get swayed to join into these fields. Because I know you can spend hundreds of dollars trying to create these schemes, trying to spend money on scholarships, only for a singular man to take it. I think you ultimately just have to weigh it as improbable, ineffective, and more likely more dangerous, more expected than bad. I think, so that means on the worst case, affirmative action is ineffective. You do not get that enough, therefore it doesn't do anything. But on best case, it is effective, and you just have spent too much money. You've likely taken money from other initiatives for women, for DEI hires, to try and go into men. And this obviously does mean that women get angry. And secondly, here on the status quo, I think, like, to claim that traditional stigma and patriarchy is changing can be true, but I think it can only be allowed to happen, only be allowed to change if women can get into these positions of power. And I think it is, like, I think I can flip this material here, because it is more likely to be seen as the patriarchy and the historical stigma culture attempting to, like, subjugate women, because the current power women hold are because of these jobs. Because as Alex told you, women needs these jobs to have a stable income, but also secondly, these jobs are often in an area in society where women, because they are a majority in the field, hold a lot of power to what they can do. So that does mean that because the majority of nurses are women, that means them striking means they can have a voice for their gender. I think it looks really bad on the government. It looks really bad on society if they're just trying to, like, replace women, trying and get women into the industry, when this is one of the few things women hold, one of the few powers that women can use, like one of the few skills that women can use to try and get their say across. I think this is really, really highly. I think it does mean that we get backlash. I think the harms Alex gives you at first on why women are likely to, like, really, hate this affirmative action, work really hard, become really polarizing between the two genders, is likely to happen. Okay, secondly then, on the gender equity pay, sort of this affirmative action, what the outcomes of this are. But I don't think you reduce pay equity, because just because men go into these unpaid jobs doesn't mean all of a sudden the government decides to listen to them and raise the pay. Like, both men and women in these jobs are underpaid at the moment, right? It's relative to other careers. And I think secondly, a new pay gap is likely to arise within these careers that previously didn't happen because they didn't have men there to post the jobs. What does this mean? I think it means that understaffed, because of the fact that the area is already understaffed, I think pay is more likely to increase to try and incentivize people to go into the industry. If you get men into this industry, there is no longer an understaffing. There is no incentive to raise the price because men have just gotten into these industries anyway. We should be all good. And I think that is a tension in their case. You can't argue that you are going to fix the pay equity gap without having to address the fact that men are going to come into these roles and fix it for you and not be able to fix this huge issue in society that we do want to want to solve. Okay, lastly then, on why having men, actually before I move on, I'll take a POI, that POI.
As a young boy, you see a male nurse come into your school when you're in year 3. You now see the value of this career, the power it has. Surely now this young boy wants to go into these professors and now they see the inherent value in it.
I think the same thing can happen if you were just to bring a male and a woman, both a male and a woman nurse to school. I don't see why you have to bring specifically a male nurse to try and incentivize young boys when there are young girls also considering what career path to think. I think it is more harmful if you were like all the women students in the class, all the girl students in the class, seeing only a male nurse come in, feeling polarized, feeling isolated from that role. I don't think you solve any issues. I think you just cause more. Okay, lastly then on why having men in these roles are harmful. And I already talked about like women and backlash point, but I want to address this point around DEI, right? We hear this claim, we hear this push, you know, you're going to have DEI isn't seen as other people, it's seen as everyone. But I think likely the fact that you are integrating these schemes and putting these schemes in place are likely to try shift the focus off the schemes around women and like other vulnerable stakeholders and groups, because they lose that focus, because you can't just say that now we have schemes to help everyone, now we have schemes to help men. Like those other vulnerable groups feel empowered because now everyone is a drove. You lose focus on those past injustices, you lose focus on that past funding, you lose focus on the women that really need it, you lose focus on addressing the issues that happened before, you lose focus on helping fight the patriarchy. I think ultimately at the end of the day, what do you believe? I think you should believe that this affirmative action likely won't succeed. I think it's more likely to be polarizing. I think it's more likely to be more like a massive investment for it to actually bring real change. I think secondly then, even if you do believe affirmative action does succeed, you don't solve the pay equity gap. Women feel underrepresented, women get mad, women feel as if they are no longer being helped. I think a lot of this money that you can use into the affirmative action for women can go into these underrepresented jobs. I want to see more women astronauts. I think men can solve their issues by themselves. Off to the moon. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the third speaker to the event.
Under the status quo, the Ministry of Education and Health New Zealand spend a substantial amount of money advertising for nurses and teachers from overseas positions. That is to say, we have a massive shortage of these roles, and I don't think it's fair for NEG to come out and say that we are simply leaving women unemployed or taking away their agency. I think instead what you see is a greater emphasis put on female-dominated roles. You see them gain more power. That's something that we are proud to stand for on our side of the house. Okay, 3 things to say in my speech. Firstly is just on why the use of affirmative action is uniquely necessary. Secondly is on service users. No, I think this has been largely unresponded to. And then thirdly is on women. Okay, firstly on the use of affirmative action. Note what we tell you at James, which is that oftentimes the biggest barrier to entry for these men is the fact that they are perpetuated stereotypes from the time that they are young, but also that there is intense internal narratives within these organisations which undervalue men. Because when they go to the interview, they feel as if they are not valued. Interviewers subconsciously think that men are not as capable because they are unlikely to be as emotional. I think the only real push they've been able to give you is to explain, well, maybe you just go to a school and you bring along a male nurse and a female nurse. Look, I think that firstly, these stereotypes are so ingrained that you just need to put an intense focus on the men. I don't think it's reasonable. I think that Health New Zealand probably already does that. It obviously doesn't work. I think you need to put an intense focus on the male nurse in order to break these systemic barriers. But I think that secondly is that can just never address the the internal issues of the organization, which is that the people interviewing are majority female. The people interviewing still have those personal narratives, and I think bringing along a male nurse and a female nurse doesn't change that. I think the difference is on our side. When you put a specific focus on male affirmative action, you change that culture within the organization. People start directly making sure that they are being fair towards men. And note, obviously, our material on quota is always going to be more effective than bringing along a man and a woman. Go ahead.
Why does a university scholarship overcome this humongous stigma that we talked about?
I'm going to deal with that one later. I will flag that. So yeah, I think that in terms of the use of affirmative action, it is absolutely necessary. You can't get any of the same outcomes without uniquely focusing on men. Okay, now next on service users, I want to note that this has been largely unresponded to, and it's a major push of the case. What do they tell you? And note that this is in response to your POI. They tell you that focusing on men is insufficient for getting more male workers. I think that, firstly, note that we've given you tons of mecs why this will work to gain more male workers, but I think secondly is to say that they kind of give you a push, which is to say, well, men can just go to work in other careers. Why do they go to nurses? First note, obviously this mechanism also applies to women. I think there's nothing stopping a woman from going in to be engineer or whatever. I think it's the narratives which do that, and I think that we keep that on our side. But I think secondly on effectiveness, the push we give you is just that the barriers are oftentimes intangible. I think that it is not obviously a scholarship is going to help. Note all the outrage about removing fees free, because it does encourage people to go into specific roles. But I think secondly, we're not the internal barriers still exist. People still go into these roles feeling like they're marginalized. They still feel like they're not safe. That's obviously a massive harm. But I think the second thing that they kind of tell you on service delivery is that they just never respond to this big push we give you, which is that there is a unique value on having men in these roles. Because when you are a vulnerable husband abusing your wife, you respond better to a male social worker because you connect with him, you kind of value him. When you are a man going through a really personal health issue, you feel more inclined to go talk to your male doctor about that. These are massive harms because the people we're talking about in this debate are incredibly vulnerable, and they only feel safe discussing this with a male nurse, which is why we need more of them. I think that secondly though, note that by having more workers in the workforce, because we tell you we are unlocking a massive percentage of the workforce, you get stronger workforces with better service delivery. I think that benefits women as well when the health system has more nurses, when you have more doctors, when you have more teachers. I think that is incredibly positive for our side. It's unclear why women don't benefit from that as well. Now, lastly, specifically on, women, how they feel about this. They say that I've kind of already responded to this in my opening, but they say that there is job losses and that kind of pushes women out. I think that this is a major part of their case. I think we've already tackled this, but I think that again, note we are spending a ton of money trying to get nurses in from overseas and get doctors in from overseas. I think that you probably save money in that regard. I think what else they say is that women kind of get really grumpy because they see money being spent on DEI and they see an opportunity cost. Firstly, note that this is a minute amount of money. It's unclear how spending a small amount of money on DEI would ever be enough to actually substantially impact nurses. But secondly, note, the reason for these strikes often is never the money alone. It's the fact that they turn up to their hospital shift and there is 5 nurses for an entire ward. It's the fact they have to work almost double overtime without being fairly paid. I think that this is something which they cannot specifically address, but we address, however, when we tell you that we get a greater workforce because suddenly women don't need to do that. Suddenly they feel valued. They have a better working environment because they have more staff. I think that that is something that we are very happy to stand for on our side. And I think we kind of flip that push they give you about women being grumpy. I think the next thing to explain is on their push about pay, because this is, I think, their last thing on women that they can kind of push is this idea of like market conditions whereby because you have more staff, there's less incentive to pay these woman-dominated roles well. I think that, look, this is a mechanism which already isn't working under the status quo. We already have a shortage. The government already doesn't want to pay these women well. But I think, secondly, they never respond to the push we give you at Michael and James, which is that this issue of these roles being underpaid has become a very gendered issue. And when we have more men in these roles, the roles are respected more. There is more political capital within the politicians to actually raise the pay. I think that that is incredibly important. They say that women lose money, lose power within their jobs, but I think when they have more money, that obviously generates more power for the woman. I think that money is something you should probably weigh very highly in regards to women. And obviously by having a greater mix of gender in these roles, because men tend to have more political capital in terms of campaigning for change, it's harder to exploit these women roles going forward. I don't think it's fair to say there's any kind of opportunity cost there. At the end of this debate, what you should believe is that A, affirmative action is uniquely necessary to address the systemic harms within the organisation and to directly confront these norms. B, women are better off because they receive better working conditions alone. And C, regardless of all of that, the impact on the public service is so great that that alone should be enough to win the debate. Proud to negate. Affirm.
I'd like to speak for the speech as well as the speaker for the
I think F is struggling to understand. Maybe a woman should teach them how their case causes more harm done than good. A couple of things in the speech. Firstly, on norms. Secondly, on pay. Thirdly, on women. But before I go into that, some framing. Firstly, how does society look now and why is this? Firstly, why aren't men in these roles? We tell you that because they aren't desirable to men because they have low pay. 2, because they have high capacity to get other better roles. 3, because there is like a societal stigma blocking them from wanting to do it. And like 4thly, because in general, globally, men have more job security. They are able to get into a wider variety of jobs in easier ways. Therefore, they don't have to just choose the first job that comes up to them, unlike women who have like lower jobs available to them and need to pick whatever's going to cause them the most security in the future. Alright, so on to why are women in these roles? We tell you firstly because either they have a passion or like they suit them characteristically, in which case good for them, but not good for them when F's case causes them to be displaced from their jobs. 2, because they like need a job, they have to pick something, and because the education required is like more affordable, they can get into a secure job more quickly and cheaply. And also because women get entry easier than they do to other jobs because of like stereotypes and stigma. They aren't blocked out during like the elimination process of other jobs. This is easier for them to get into in like job interview ways. Okay, now onto some impacting. When we tell you why men aren't in these jobs, it means that F has a high tipping point to reach to prove why this changes. Men already have capacity to get into these jobs financially, not incentive. They have to prove how their affirmative action uniquely incentivizes men to get into these jobs. Secondly, when we tell you why women are in these jobs, it means that they become the most vulnerable group in this debate and any harm can be proved to them way highly. When F spends like very little time throughout all 3 of their speeches talking about women, they're kind of like, oh, women, I guess. Like that means that they don't manage to get any like strong points here. Alright, firstly on norms. Who do they affect and like will this change? Firstly, F tells you that norms obstruct men from getting in these jobs, and women domination in these fields perpetuates this. Firstly, we tell you, barely. Norms obstruct women far more than they do men who can get into jobs. They're just scared that it will make them, look weak for going into nursing, because typically most men don't go into nursing. They are financially able to get into these jobs. They just, are scared of the stigma. Secondly, we tell you that other methods could be to solve this. For example, assisting women to get into male-dominated fields so that there is more of an equal spread. I don't see why we uniquely need to help men when they're the ones that need less help, rather than women getting into these other jobs. Thirdly, we tell you that this knifes your case, because then you have a very high financial burden to incentivize a man to break these norms if you tell us these norms and the stigma is so strong. Secondly, F claims that they can combat norms at a very young age. Firstly, your case doesn't uniquely solve this, and it only addresses the norms attached to men. Nowhere in your case do you actually help women, the most vulnerable group, and you don't think about the young girls who are being taught that they actually don't get any assistance later on in life, and the only thing the government actually cares about is getting men into the jobs that they were prescribed initially for them. Thirdly, they claim that men are able to do these jobs, and the people who need these services need uniquely men to look after them because they relate to them more. Firstly, we tell you that there are still some men in these industries. They're not purely female industries, they're just female dominated. There are men in these fields that can do this. Secondly, we tell you that these particularly picky people, I guess, are a minority. The majority of people in the education system and the health system are perfectly happy with a female nurse or a female teacher. And thirdly, you yourselves claim that both genders are equally good at their jobs. So why are you all of a sudden telling us that men are uniquely able to do this, and most people want men in these jobs? So I think at the end of that point of clash of norms, we prove that not only does F give themselves a very high burden to incentivize getting men into these jobs, but also we tell you that they actually don't address the people who are most vulnerable, which is women. Alright, moving on to pay. Who is most effective and how will it change? F tells you that they will solve the gender pay gap. When men get into these fields, the government will finally listen and just raise pay. Firstly, this tells you that they're incredibly confident in the ability of men here to persuade the government to do whatever they want. Secondly, we tell you why it's unclear why the government is suddenly capable or willing to pour money into helping men here and helping these industries that are usually lower priority for government spending. 3, we tell you that if the government now wants to have lots more men in these fields, they have to find money to pay them somehow, which either comes out of the women's wages in these fields, which means that we're actually making the gender pay gap in these fields worse, or other vital public sectors. There is limited money. The major flaw in F's case is that they think that money grows on trees and they can just get it wherever they want to try and help men get into these fields and somehow solve the gender pay gap, which I think is just impossible on their side. Alright, finally onto women, but before I do that, I will take a PI.
If breaking these norms is so hard, and when our case presents a solution to get DEI happening in other areas, how do you have the money and resources to get women into the male-dominated fields which you say you will?
I think uniquely, we are able to do it in a way that doesn't cost as much money, and I think even if we aren't able to do it, at least our side in the status quo, where we don't have all these unique harms to women who are displaced from jobs, is better on your side of the house, where you do get people uniquely displaced from jobs, and you end up actually widening the gender pay gap. Alright, on to women. How do they feel and why does this matter? Which it does matter, by the way. F claims that women will only be angry if job displacement happens. Firstly, we tell you that this is untrue. They'll be mad simply on the basis that they are more vulnerable and the government is ignoring them and choosing to prioritize men instead, who literally aren't even protesting. How would you feel if you were sticking your hand up in class and you were me, and the teacher was over here? It doesn't feel nice when you're ignored and you're the one that needs it the most and is speaking up for it the most. Secondly, we tell you that we have sufficiently proven that job displacement does happen. We had so many mix from this all the way from first. The only response from F was that's unfair to claim. What's actually unfair is F's case for women. They also claim that women are just more worried about other things, so they're not going to prioritize caring about this or protesting about this, or they're simply just not going to have any feelings about this. We tell you that this is one of their top priorities because careers are so important to women. I think it's just really mean to claim that women don't care about their careers or care about their financial incentives. This is literally the strongest thing. Women care about the gender pay gap. It's their top priority. I don't see how they don't care about it. This was a really weird claim for F to make. Alright, so at the end of the point about women, we tell you that we do care about them, we do address them the most, and we tell you that F's case doesn't look after them and actually causes more harm to them than good. They're only they're only pushes towards women, or they'll get them some side benefits when men get into these jobs. It's very clear that they only care about the men. So what does this debate look like? We tell you that F's case ends up in one of two ways. Either one, they pour the money in, who knows where this come from, but somehow they manage to source it, I don't know, but they don't reach the tipping point needed to actually incentivize men to get into these roles. We told you that this stigma is incredibly strong. F literally use their own case to back this up, therefore they have a really high burden to reach to get this tipping point. Money is wasted and society isn't benefited on their side of the house. Or two, they reach the tipping point somehow, required to incentivize men into these professions, but now either one, men don't feel welcome here because all the women in the industry now hate them because they've gotten scholarships or whatever to get in there, and they didn't get any help, the men just get extra help. And then secondly, women are displaced from jobs because there is a limited quota, there is a limited amount of job spots, there is a limited amount of money. Otherwise, these jobs wouldn't be underpaid and understaffed in the first place. Women are displaced from jobs, they don't have the opportunity to get into higher up jobs. It becomes purely male-dominated fields, and no one actually looks after the women. Alright, going back to some of our content that I think went really unresponded to and still stands in this stands in this debate when F's case has now fallen. We tell you that the tipping point for men to join is an extremely high burden. Hospitals can't pay heaps of employees, there is a limit. This ties back to all the material that I just gave you. We told you that there's a really strong opportunity cost because it actually isn't effective. It's extremely polarizing for the women. Both men and women are underpaid. There's a new pay gap. F has so many tensions in their case and they don't look after the most vulnerable people in this debate, which are the women.
For their speech, and as is customary, we're both speaking for that, but reply speaking.
F lose this debate when they believe that in the status quo, hospitals simply choose to not use their infinite money supplies to hire more nurses to fix their crisis. Why would a uni scholarship suddenly give employers more incentive to hire more workers? I think there is a lot of flaws in F's case. Two things to do in reply. Firstly, on effectivity of F action, and secondly on the men in these fields, and lastly on women. So firstly, on the effectivity of F action, and I think at the end of the day, we hear a lot of reasons as to what F's affirmative action has to address. That is the huge societal stigma and passion. And I think both teams, both oppositions sort of agree that these jobs require a lot of passion and there can be a lot of stigma surrounding these jobs. So then what does F decide? What does affirmative try and bring in? Well, it tries to bring in male nurse role models, schemes that highlight men into these jobs, and scholarships. But we prove to you on different levels why that doesn't work. Because we prove to you why having singular male nurses doesn't fully solve a massive cultural issue in society, but also young girls get harmed thinking that men are the only ones that can get into these roles. I think schemes that highlight men also take away from DEI, from women. I think these are huge harms that AF have to cop if they decide to go ahead with affirmative action. But ultimately, I think there's a huge financial burden to break the massive cultural stigma. And even if you do somehow solve this, you lose that focus on DEI and women's schemes, because women see the money spent on men. Women see these huge affirmative actions, this huge incentive that the government is putting in place, and thinks, why didn't it happen to us? Why are we the ones that get left behind? Why are men the ones who are prioritized? And I think that ultimately does mean we get that backlash, we get that danger. Secondly, then, on men in these fields, because you can't, if both are equal at their job, you cannot prove men are somehow superior and are more will be more advantageous if we get them into the jobs. I think these specific needs around male nurses, around male teachers, can still be filled in the status quo, because these male nurses, male teachers still exist in the status quo. I think this isn't a harm. It was never proven to us why this is an immediate issue. I think this point falls out of the debate. I think secondly, then, on the point around pay equity, I think we gave you really good mechanization on why hospitals and why these jobs have limited money. Which means we can beat them on both their worst case and their best case. I think on their worst case, I think this is really dangerous, because men get the jobs because they want to appease these schemes. They want to look as if they are hiring men. They are trying to trying to fulfill these schemes, trying to get these scholarship like students and men in. And I think that does mean you displace women. I don't think you end up getting more jobs in general. I think you just get men in these jobs. Women lose their financial incomes. This is really bad. But I think on their best case, I think it means everyone gets jobs. And, you might solve the issue of understaffing, but suddenly everyone's pay worsens because there's limited amounts of money you can pay people. And suddenly everyone's salary decreases. And it means you don't get anyone happy. And I think the pay equity gap actually worsens. I think this is a huge issue. And lastly then, on women. Well, I think it is, we gave you examples on why it's so important that women hold roles in society. I think it means they have stable incomes. It is crucial for them because of how important these roles are in the areas of society that they fill. But I think lastly then, the point around women feeling empowered is generally just really important. Because if suddenly we shift that focus from the DEI schemes, from the schemes that help women feel empowered to go into jobs that help them get higher positions of power, you are no longer letting that male hierarchy, patriarchy, take place. I think it is really important instead that we increase the focus on women trying to get ahead, because that is what wins us the debate and gets society on more equal levels. Proud to negate. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite the reply speaker to the affirming team to conclude the debate.
The first thing I want to do at the start of my leader's reply is to note the shift we get in the next team case about what they believe is the primary problem here. We hear from Third Neg and from leaders that really the only issue with our case is that we just don't have enough money. We believe that this is what they spend the vast majority of their speeches on, but we believe that even though we don't have a lot of time to respond to this, we can mine our own case to give responses to this. I think firstly we tell you that even if we get a small increase in these things, not a significant amount of money being put into these things, these are long-term things that compound over time. We get people going into these jobs. It doesn't have to be a significant investment. I think secondly, mine our material when we tell you that we get a lot more support, bipartisan support, coalition of men and women to support these things. We believe when the Ministry of Education bureaucracy can double in size, we can also get far more allocation for these materials. We believe that their shift at neg block doesn't really work. But onto the 2 points of class we see in this debate. One, how do we uplift these fields? How do we improve the quality of these fields? And then secondly, what are the impacts on women? I'll start with the impacts on women first, actually, because I believe this is what we spend a lot of the neg team's case is about. We believe firstly we get this entire push from the neg team's case about how women are uniquely accessible to these jobs and how men will place women in these jobs and what this means. Okay, what do we tell you in response to this? I think we tell you quite a lot. I think we tell you that given that both teams have characterized this case as have characterized the current situation of these professions, being that there's a significant shortage in these jobs. I believe it's quite intuitive for you to believe that because there is this shortage, that when we have more men, we're just filling up these spots. We're not necessarily displacing women. But secondly, we also tell you that, as Michael told you about the quiz last night, that we believe that there are other options through these DEI initiatives, which note we will also improve for you later as I get you to how we improve DEI, that women can also access other fields now as well. They can access STEM jobs. I believe this doesn't really work. The only other really positive material we get from the negating team is that women lose their power in this job. We believe they don't have power when they don't have enough money to go out on strike. We believe when we give them better pay equity, when we have a standard, when we can combat when we have better pay equity, when we can pay them far more, we give them far more power, we give them far more agency to go on strike for longer. We believe this is how we give women power in this debate. Note we also tell you, note here what obstructs women from progress, what obstructs the progress of DEI. We believe it is the fact that we've polarized men so significantly that men do not support these initiatives. We believe that when we do these things and when we appeal to men, when we tell men that you should support these things, you should support women in these jobs, we gave you more votes for DEI initiatives. We give you removing any right-wing ability to attack DEI initiatives because they stand for everyone. We believe we, in fact, ameliorate the DEI initiatives and their effectiveness. What does this mean? It means that a young woman that wants to go into STEM is going to be far more empowered because our DEI initiatives are far more effective. We believe we give you like the norm just continues to give more prestige to these jobs that women do as well. We believe women are so much better off under our side of the house when they have the agency for more pay equity and when they have these things as well. Though we win on this point as well, but then we also win on how we uplift these fields. We give you a lot. We give you why there are no men in these fields because of these narratives and because of these norms. We tell you why do women note why do women go into these places. We get the only material we get from the negative case is that just like they have no other places for them to go. We've proven there are other places for them to go. So then why do they go to these fields? Because they are altruistic and they have the incentive. Therefore, when we tell you that we teach young boys that you can get this incentive, that there is value in these professions, values in these jobs, these are fulfilling, there's catharsis, there's value for this job in society. Young boys want to go and do these jobs now. They want to go do these things. We prove to you that there are other men that will join you in doing these things. The effectiveness, if you believe that initiatives like Women in STEM are effective, you should also believe that ours are effective as well. We believe at the end of this, these things also compound more men, will bring more men with them. We believe just very clearly men choose to go into these professions. What are the outcomes of this? They're immense. We get just generally more people helping with our shortages, but secondly and most specifically, because when a young boy does not believe that they can talk to a female nurse about their mental health issues because they've been taken up by the manosphere, we believe that when we have a male nurse that can do this because we're proportionate now to the amount of people in society, that is a benefit that is unique to our case. That is why I'm proud to affirm.
More speakers, Fox, Charlie, Rowan, Beck. I'd like to ask everyone to shake hands and then ask everyone to be for what they've done.